Billionaire CEO saw a girl sleeping in class. His heart was never the same. Some things can't be purchased, Dominic Vaughan said quietly, looking around at the modest living room with its carefully mended furniture and walls covered with family photos. For the first time in 15 years, the billionaire CEO felt something crack inside his perfectly constructed world. "But you could buy anything you want," insisted the teenage girl, her curiosity overcoming her initial shyness. Standing in this tiny house that somehow felt more like a home than his luxury penthouse ever had, Dominic realized a truth he'd been running from his entire adult life. All his billions couldn't buy what this struggling family had created, with nothing but love and determination. "No," he replied, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "The most valuable things in life are earned, not purchased." The path that led Dominic Vaughan to this moment of clarity began months earlier with a chance encounter that would change everything he thought he knew about success. Dominic Vaughan straightened his custom Italian silk tie as the elevator ascended to the 87th floor of the Apogee Tower. The mirrored walls reflected a man the world envied, powerful, wealthy, untouchable. Forbes had just named him most influential CEO under 40 for the third consecutive year. His company, Horizon Technologies, had revolutionized renewable energy storage, making him a billionaire before his 35th birthday. Yet as the elevator doors opened to his penthouse office with its panoramic view of the city skyline, Dominic felt the familiar hollowness expand within his chest. "Mr. Vaughan, your 9 a.m. quarterly review is prepared," his assistant Victoria said, appearing beside him with practiced efficiency. "The board is particularly interested in discussing the Shanghai expansion." "Thank you, Victoria," Dominic replied, taking the tablet she offered. "And Professor Montgomery confirmed for next month." "Yes, sir. Westmore University is honored to have you guest lecture for their Advanced Business Strategy course. They're expecting record attendance." Dominic nodded, satisfaction briefly displacing the emptiness. Westmore, his alma mater, where he'd launched his first successful venture from a cramped dorm room. Returning as a billionaire industry leader felt like the completion of a perfect circle. That night, alone in his penthouse, Dominic sipped 30-year-old scotch and stared at the glittering city below. He'd achieved everything he'd ever written in his meticulous 5-year plans. Yet here he was, scrolling through investment reports at midnight because the alternative silence felt unbearable. His phone rang his sister, Rebecca, the only person who would call this late. "Dom, did I wake you?" Rebecca's voice carried the perpetual warmth he sometimes envied. "You know I'm always working," he replied, setting down his glass. "That's exactly why I'm calling. Sophie had her dance recital today. She asked specifically if Uncle Dom would come." Dominic closed his eyes, genuine regret washing over him. "Rebecca, I'm sorry. The Beijing investors were too important to miss," she finished for him. "I know. I told her you'd make the next one." "I will," he promised, knowing even as he said it that something would inevitably take precedence. "Dom," Rebecca's voice softened, "when was the last time you did something that wasn't for Horizon?" The question lingered uncomfortably after they hung up. Dominic stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, watching distant headlights trace patterns through the city. Success had become his identity, his purpose, his entire world. When had that stopped being enough? The next morning, Dominic's driver, Michael, navigated the sleek black sedan through early traffic toward Westmore University. The campus hadn't changed much in 15 years, the same grand oak trees lining the main quad, the same red brick buildings with their dignified columns. "I'll message you when I'm finished," Dominic told Michael, stepping out of the car. "Shouldn't be more than 2 hours." Students hurried past, some doing double takes as they recognized him. Dominic had grown accustomed to the attention his success brought, the whispers and sidelong glances. He strode across campus with the confidence of a man who belonged anywhere he chose to be. Professor Montgomery greeted him outside the lecture hall, enthusiasm evident in his firm handshake. "Dominic, what an honor to have you back at Westmore. The students are incredibly excited." "The honor is mine, Professor. Westmore gave me my start. I'm happy to give something back." The lecture hall buzzed with anticipation. Students whispered excitedly, smartphones ready to capture a glimpse of the famous Dominic Vaughan. He'd arrived early, watching from backstage as Professor Montgomery attempted to bring the class to order. "Today's guest needs no introduction," Montgomery announced, "but I'll give him one anyway." Dominic tuned out the familiar accolades: youngest CEO to make Fortune's cover twice, revolutionary patent holder, business visionary. Instead, he scanned the audience, remembering himself, at their age hungry, ambitious, certain that success would answer every question that mattered. His gaze stopped at the back row. A young woman had fallen asleep, her head resting on her arm, dark hair cascading across her notebook. For reasons Dominic couldn't explain, the sight struck him with unexpected force. Not irritation, as it might have years ago, but something closer to recognition. Professor Montgomery's voice broke through his thoughts. "Without further ado, let me introduce Dominic Vaughan." The applause was thunderous. Dominic moved to the podium with practiced confidence, launching into his carefully prepared talk on disruptive innovation. Throughout his presentation, his eyes kept returning to the back row. The young woman had awakened, looking mortified as she realized where she was and who was speaking. But instead of slipping out, she straightened her posture and began taking notes with fierce concentration. Success isn't about having the most brilliant idea, Dominic concluded 40 minutes later. It's about resilience, the capacity to fail, adapt, and persist when others would quit. Thank you. The question session that followed was predictable: how to get venture capital, his morning routine, advice for startups. As students filed out afterward, Dominic noticed the young woman from the back row gathering her things slowly, fatigue evident in every movement. "Excuse me," he said, approaching her as the hall emptied. "I believe you missed the beginning of my lecture." She looked up, eyes widening with embarrassment. "Mr. Vaughan, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean disrespect." Up close, Dominic noted details he'd missed from the podium. The slight fraying of her sweater cuffs, the dark circles beneath intelligent brown eyes, the 3 different textbooks balanced precariously in her arms. "I'm not offended," he said, surprising himself with the truth of it. "Just curious what could be more exhausting than business strategy." A smile flickered briefly across her face. "Try a night shift at Memorial Hospital, followed by morning classes and an afternoon job at the campus cafeteria." Something about her straightforward answer, delivered without self-pity, intrigued him. "I'm Dominic Vaughan," he said, extending his hand. "I know," she replied with unexpected humor. "They mentioned it a few times. I'm Natasha Winters." Professor Montgomery approached, breaking their exchange. "Dominic, the dean would love to speak with you about the Innovation Lab donation." With a nod to Natasha, Dominic allowed himself to be led away, though he found himself glancing back at her as she disappeared through the lecture hall doors. Later, during a tedious luncheon with university administrators, Dominic found himself asking casually, "Professor Montgomery, the student I was speaking with after the lecture, Natasha Winters. Is she one of your top performers?" Montgomery looked surprised. "Natasha? Bright girl. Absolutely. Scholarship student with tremendous potential, but her attendance has been challenging lately. Works too many jobs, I suspect. Why do you ask?" "Just curious," Dominic replied, turning the conversation back to safer territory. That evening, instead of returning immediately to his waiting jet, Dominic found himself walking across campus, retracing paths he hadn't walked in 15 years. The university had changed new buildings, new technologies, yet the energy remained the same. Young people hurrying between classes, imagining futures that stretched endlessly before them. He paused outside the campus cafeteria, telling himself it was nostalgia rather than curiosity that drew him there. Through the windows, he spotted Natasha behind the counter, serving food with efficient movements, her expression focused despite evident exhaustion. Dominic watched for a moment, then turned away, unsettled by his own interest. On the flight home, he found himself thinking not about the university's proposed innovation lab, but about a student asleep in the back row, fighting to stay awake through sheer determination. Back at Horizon headquarters, days passed in their usual rhythm of meetings, decisions, and strategy sessions. Yet Dominic found himself distracted, contemplating a question he couldn't quite articulate. "Sir?" Victoria's voice broke through his thoughts. "The board members are waiting in the conference room." Dominic nodded, gathering his materials. "Victoria, contact Westmore University. I'd like to schedule a series of guest lectures, perhaps a full seminar course. Victoria's eyebrow arched slightly. A whole seminar? That would be at least 6 weeks of commitment. I'm aware of the time investment, Dominic replied, already walking toward the conference room. Make it happen. 2 weeks later, Dominic surprised his executive team by announcing he would be teaching a 6-week seminar series at Westmore. Community engagement, he explained smoothly, ignoring Victoria's raised eyebrow. He'd never shown interest in teaching before. The seminar drew over 100 applicants for 30 spots. Dominic personally reviewed the applications, pausing when he reached Natasha Winters' thoughtful essay on sustainable business models in healthcare. The first session, he scanned the room immediately, locating her in the middle row. Unlike their previous encounter, she was alert, prepared, and the first to ask a substantive question about long-term investment strategies. But how do you balance shareholder expectations with ethical considerations? She pressed, after his initial answer. Particularly in markets where regulatory frameworks are still developing? Dominic found himself genuinely engaged by her inquiry. That's the central tension of modern business leadership. Most executives default to short-term profit metrics because they're quantifiable and immediate. The challenge is creating measurements for long-term value creation that include social impact. Over the following weeks, Dominic noticed her contributions consistently demonstrated unusual insight. She approached problems differently than her classmates, identifying unconventional solutions with practical applications. After the third session, he asked her to stay behind. Your analysis of the case study was excellent, he said, gathering his materials. You found angles the Harvard Business Review missed. Natasha looked surprised by the compliment. Thank you. I've had some practical experience with how systems break down when they're designed by people who never have to use them. Explain, Dominic requested, genuinely interested. She hesitated before answering. My parents were killed in a car accident 3 years ago. My brother was 16, my sister 14. I was 19 and suddenly responsible for everything. The systems designed to help insurance, healthcare, financial aid, they're labyrinthine when you're operating on no sleep and constant fear. The matter-of-fact delivery couldn't mask the weight of her experience. Dominic felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. Yet you're here, in one of the most demanding programs at Westmore. I don't have the luxury of failure, she said simply. Leo and Zoe are counting on me. Something in her words resonated deeply with Dominic. He'd grown up with privilege, yet had approached his own education with the same do-or-die intensity. But while his drive came from ambition, hers came from love and responsibility. I'm starting a small project team for promising students, he said, a plan forming as he spoke. Paid internship, flexible hours, real-world business applications. Would you be interested? The flash of hope in her eyes was quickly tempered by practicality. What would the time commitment be? I can't give up my hospital job. The health insurance covers my siblings. We can work around your schedule, Dominic found himself saying. The project needs your perspective. Only later, as his driver navigated evening traffic, did Dominic question his impulsive offer. He'd created an internship position specifically for a student he barely knew, based on an intuition he couldn't articulate. It wasn't how he ran Horizon, where every decision was calculated, data-driven, and emotionally detached. Yet, he didn't regret it. The following week, Natasha and 3 other students began their internship at Horizon Technologies. Dominic had tasked them with analyzing inefficiencies in healthcare delivery systems, a project tangentially related to Horizon's work in medical technology, but largely created to accommodate Natasha's experience and constraints. Mr. Vaughn wants weekly progress reports. Victoria informed the interns during orientation. He rarely involves himself directly with internship programs, so consider yourselves fortunate. One of the students, a confident young man named Parker, raised his hand. Will we be working directly with Mr. Vaughn? Victoria's smile was polite but skeptical. Mr. Vaughn oversees projects worth billions of dollars. You'll be reporting to Dr. Lowery in research and development. That afternoon, Victoria entered Dominic's office with her usual efficiency. The interns have been settled, sir. Dr. Lowery will supervise as requested. Thank you, Victoria. I'd like to join their initial briefing tomorrow. Victoria paused, surprise briefly crossing her features. Of course, sir. I'll adjust your schedule. The following day, Dominic entered the small conference room where the internship team was gathering. Conversation stopped immediately as he walked in, 4 pairs of eyes widening in surprise. "Good morning," he said casually, taking a seat at the table rather than at its head. "I hope you don't mind if I join your first strategy session." The meeting was unexpectedly productive. While the other interns remained somewhat intimidated by his presence, Natasha quickly overcame her initial hesitation, challenging assumptions and proposing innovative approaches to patient navigation systems. "The problem isn't just technological," she explained, sketching a diagram on the whiteboard. "It's psychological. When people are ill or frightened, their ability to navigate complex systems decreases dramatically. We need interfaces that adapt to emotional states, not just cognitive abilities." Dominic found himself impressed not just by her insight, but by her clear communication and leadership. The other interns gradually followed her lead, contributing their own perspectives with increasing confidence. As weeks passed, Dominic maintained an unusual level of involvement with the internship project. He attended strategy sessions, reviewed proposals, and provided direct feedback, behavior Victoria observed with quiet curiosity. The internship project optimizing healthcare delivery systems gave Dominic a legitimate reason to mentor Natasha and the other students. He scheduled weekly meetings at Horizon's downtown offices, always arranging for the company car to pick up Natasha, who would otherwise spend hours on public transportation. During one such ride, Dominic found himself sharing the back seat with her after a late strategy session. "You didn't have to wait," Natasha said, looking uncomfortable with his courtesy. "I could have taken the bus." "It's nearly midnight," Dominic replied, "and you mentioned you have an 8 a.m. class tomorrow." She smiled faintly. "You remembered." "I remember everything that matters," he said, then felt oddly self-conscious about the statement. The car slowed in a modest neighborhood of small houses. Natasha gathered her things as they approached a well-kept but tiny bungalow. "Would you like to come in?" she asked suddenly. "Meet Leo and Zoe? They're probably still awake. They never believe me when I tell them I work with Dominic Vaughn." Dominic hesitated, then nodded to his driver. "I'll be 15 minutes." The house was warm, cluttered with school books and musical instruments. A teenaged boy looked up from a textbook spread across the kitchen table, while a girl with Natasha's eyes appeared from another room, wireless earbuds dangling around her neck. "Guys, this is Mr. Vaughn," Natasha said, a note of pride in her voice that caught Dominic off guard. "My boss from the internship." Leo stood awkwardly, extending his hand. "Sir, Natasha says you're revolutionizing energy storage." "Among other things," Dominic replied, surprised by the young man's firm handshake. "Your sister tells me you're interested in engineering." "Yes, sir. I'm hoping to study electrical engineering, maybe work with renewable energy someday." "An excellent field," Dominic said genuinely. "We'll need innovative engineers to solve the climate challenges ahead." Zoe approached more cautiously. "Are you really a billionaire?" "Zoe," Natasha admonished, but Dominic laughed, a genuine sound he hadn't heard from himself in months. "It's complicated," he answered honestly. "On paper, yes. In reality, I work for a company that's valued very highly." "But you could buy anything you want," Zoe persisted, curiosity overcoming shyness. Dominic looked around the modest living room at the carefully mended furniture, the walls covered with family photos, the obvious care that made this small house a home despite financial constraints. "Some things can't be purchased," he said quietly. He noticed a science fair ribbon pinned to the refrigerator, a handmade birthday card displayed on a shelf, faded photographs of Natasha with 2 adults who must have been her parents. This place had something his sterile penthouse lacked, something money couldn't acquire. Later, as his car pulled away, Dominic found himself deeply affected by the brief encounter. For years, he'd justified his relentless work ethic as necessary for Horizon's success. Yet Natasha worked just as hard, harder, perhaps not for personal achievement, but for love. For the first time, Dominic wondered what he was working for. The question followed him back to his penthouse, echoing through the minimalist spaces he'd never truly made his own. He wandered through rooms decorated by an interior designer whose name he couldn't recall, surrounded by expensive art chosen for investment value rather than personal connection. That night, Dominic did something he hadn't done in years. He called his sister, without a specific reason. "Dom? Rebecca sounded surprised. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, he assured her. I was just thinking about Sophie's next recital. When is it? The silence on the other end told him how unexpected this inquiry was. It's next Saturday afternoon. But I know you're busy. I'll be there, he interrupted. I promise. The following morning, Victoria entered his office with the day's schedule and found him staring out the window, lost in thought. Sir, the board is gathering for the quarterly presentation. Dominic turned, decision crystallizing. Victoria, I need you to make some changes to my schedule. Clear my Saturdays for the foreseeable future. Family commitments. If she was surprised, her professional demeanor revealed nothing. Of course, Mr. Vaughn. And for this Saturday specifically, I'll be attending my niece's dance recital. The internship extended beyond its original timeline. Natasha's healthcare optimization project showed such promise that Dominic secured additional funding, enabling her to reduce her hospital hours while maintaining her family's insurance coverage. Their professional relationship evolved into something more complicated, not romantic, but a connection that defied easy categorization. She challenged his thinking, questioned assumptions he'd long taken for granted. He provided opportunities, opened doors, and found himself increasingly invested in her success. Victoria noticed the change in him first. You've smiled twice today, she observed one afternoon, placing contracts on his desk for signing, and you haven't checked the Singapore market once since lunch. Dominic looked up, pen pausing mid-signature. Is that unusual? For you? It's unprecedented. She hesitated. The Westmore project seems to be good for you. The comment lingered as Dominic prepared for that evening's seminar. He'd always defined himself by achievement, measurable, quantifiable success. Yet lately, he found more satisfaction in Natasha's growing confidence than in Horizon's climbing stock price. After class, Dominic found Natasha waiting by his car. I need your advice, she said without preamble. Eversource Healthcare offered me a position after graduation. Full benefits, competitive salary, serious advancement potential. That's excellent, Dominic replied, genuinely pleased. They're industry leaders. But Horizon also made an offer, she continued. Your VP of Strategic Development called this morning. Dominic frowned. I didn't authorize. I know, Natasha interrupted. That's why I'm confused. She said you'd mentioned my work, but hadn't formally recommended me. They're interested anyway. Dominic felt conflicting emotions, pride that his executives recognized her talent independently, concern about the complications of having her at Horizon. Which opportunity interests you more? He asked carefully. Eversource is the logical choice, she said. Their healthcare benefits would cover Leo and Zoe completely. The schedule would let me help Leo with college applications next year. But Horizon is doing work that matters, revolutionary work. She looked directly at him. And I've learned more from you in 6 months than in 3 years of classes. The simple truth of her statement settled between them. Take the Eversource position, Dominic said finally. It's better for your family right now. Disappointment flickered across her face, quickly masked. You're probably right. But, he continued, I'd like to propose an alternative. A dual arrangement. Part-time with Eversource for the benefits. Part-time with a foundation I'm establishing. Same compensation as a full-time role at either company, but with flexibility for your family obligations. What foundation? She asked, brow furrowed. One that doesn't exist yet, Dominic admitted, but will by the time you graduate, focused on redesigning systems that are failing the people who need them most. Her eyes widened with understanding. Based on my project? Inspired by it, he clarified, and by you. The car ride was quiet after that, both lost in their own thoughts. When they reached her home, Natasha turned to him before getting out. Thank you, she said simply. For seeing possibilities I couldn't. That night, Dominic didn't return to his penthouse. Instead, he directed his driver to Rebecca's suburban home, arriving unannounced, just as his sister was putting Sophie to bed. Dom, Rebecca stood in the doorway, confusion evident. Is everything wrong? Nothing's wrong, he assured her, stepping inside. I just wanted to see you. And Sophie, if she's still awake. Rebecca studied his face. She's just getting into bed. You can say goodnight if you want." Sophie's delight at seeing her uncle was palpable, her small arms wrapping tightly around his neck as he sat on the edge of her bed. "Uncle Dom, Mom said you were too busy to come to my recital." "I was," he admitted, "but I've realized something important. Being busy isn't the same as doing what matters." He smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "I'll be at your recital on Saturday, front row." After Sophie fell asleep, Dominic joined Rebecca in the kitchen, accepting the cup of tea she offered. "Okay, who are you, and what have you done with my brother?" she asked, only half joking. Dominic smiled, turning the mug in his hands. "I've been thinking about what you said about doing something that wasn't for Horizon. And I met someone who made me question everything I thought I knew about success." Rebecca's eyebrows shot up. "A woman?" "Not like that," Dominic corrected quickly. "A student. She's raising her teenage siblings while working multiple jobs and excelling academically. She does more before 9 a.m. than I accomplish all day, and she does it without resources or recognition." "Sounds impressive," Rebecca said carefully. "She is, but more importantly, she's reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Purpose matters more than profit." He met his sister's gaze. "I'm starting a foundation." The following morning, Dominic arrived at Horizon headquarters earlier than usual. By the time Victoria arrived, he had already drafted a preliminary mission statement for the Vaughn Foundation and listed potential board members. "Victoria, I need you to clear my schedule this afternoon and contact our legal team. I want to establish a new non-profit organization." If Victoria was surprised by this sudden shift, her professional demeanor revealed nothing. "Of course, Mr. Vaughn. Any specific focus for this organization?" "System redesign," he replied. "Healthcare, education, social services, the bureaucratic mazes that fail the people who need them most. And I want information on how to create positions that bridge corporate and non-profit sectors." Victoria nodded, making notes. "Anything else?" Dominic looked up from his computer. "Yes. Find out who at Eversource Healthcare handles executive recruitment. I need to speak with them about a partnership." The next few weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Between his responsibilities at Horizon, the foundation planning, and his continued teaching at Westmore, Dominic found himself busier than ever, yet strangely, more energized than he'd been in years. The Dominic Vaughn Foundation came together with remarkable speed, his reputation and resources opening doors that would have remained closed to others. By the time Natasha's graduation approached, legal structures were in place, initial funding secured, and a board of directors assembled from leaders in healthcare, education, and technology. On a warm May afternoon, Dominic sat among proud parents and family members, watching Natasha receive her degree with highest honors. From his vantage point, he could see Leo and Zoe beaming from their seats, their pride evident even from a distance. After the ceremony, he made his way through the crowd to where Natasha stood with her siblings, all three engaged in an animated group hug. "Congratulations," he said, as they separated. "Though I'm not surprised excellence seems to be your default setting." Natasha laughed, happiness making her seem younger than the serious student he'd first encountered. "Thank you for coming. It means a lot." "I wouldn't have missed it." He handed her a small envelope, a graduation gift. Inside was a formal offer letter, joint positions at Eversource Healthcare and the newly formed Vaughn Foundation, with a compensation package exceeding either company's standard offer and benefits that would cover all three siblings comprehensively. Natasha looked up from the letter, eyes wide. "You actually did it! You created an entire foundation!" "The foundation was always going to happen," Dominic replied. "You just accelerated the timeline and sharpened the focus." "Mr. Vaughn, I don't know how to thank you." "Dominic," he corrected. "Colleagues use first names, and no thanks necessary. This isn't charity, it's investment in talent. The foundation needs your perspective, and frankly, so do I." The Dominic Vaughn Foundation launched 3 months later with little fanfare but significant funding. Its mission to redesign broken systems in healthcare, education, and social services attracted top talent from multiple industries. But its first hire remained its most significant, Natasha Winters, whose personal experience navigating those systems proved invaluable. For Dominic, The foundation represented something he hadn't anticipated when he'd noticed a sleeping student months earlier, a profound shift in his understanding of success. Horizon continued to thrive under his leadership, but no longer consumed every waking hour. He found time to attend Sophie's dance recitals, to mentor Leo through college applications, to develop relationships beyond boardrooms. The Foundation's first project targeted hospital discharge procedures for patients without family support, a direct application of Natasha's healthcare navigation model. The pilot program at 3 urban hospitals showed immediate impact, reducing readmission rates and medication errors while improving patient satisfaction. "The numbers are exceeding our projections," Natasha reported during a strategy meeting, 6 months into implementation, especially among elderly patients and those with limited English proficiency. Dominic nodded, reviewing the data on his tablet. The personal navigator approach is making the difference. Technology helps, but human connection matters more. Exactly, Natasha agreed, which is why I'd like to propose expanding the peer support component. As the meeting continued, Dominic found himself observing the confidence with which Natasha presented her ideas, the respect she commanded from colleagues twice her age, the passion that infused her work. She'd flourished in these 6 months, growing from promising student to emerging leader. Later that afternoon, Victoria entered his office with the quarterly financial reports. Horizon's stock is up 12% since last quarter, she noted, placing the documents on his desk. "And foundation metrics?" Dominic asked, surprising her. "The foundation isn't publicly traded, sir." "I know that, Victoria. I'm asking about impact assessments, patient outcomes, system improvements, quality of life measurements." Victoria blinked, then recovered smoothly. "I'll have those reports sent over immediately." When she returned an hour later with the requested information, she paused before leaving. "Sir, if I may speak candidly?" Dominic gestured for her to continue. "I've worked for you for 7 years. In that time, I've seen you build Horizon into a global powerhouse through single-minded focus on growth metrics. Now you're equally interested in outcomes that don't directly affect the bottom line." She hesitated. "It's a significant shift." "Is that a problem?" "Not at all," Victoria replied. "I find it heartening, particularly the scholarship program for siblings of first-generation college students." Dominic looked up sharply. The foundation had recently launched a scholarship specifically targeting families like Natasha's, where one sibling's educational achievement could create opportunities for others. "You've noticed the pattern," he observed. "It would be difficult not to, sir. Your priorities have evolved considerably since the Westmore seminar began." After Victoria left, Dominic stood at his office windows, contemplating her observation. His priorities had indeed changed, subtly at first, then more dramatically as the foundation took shape. He still worked hard, perhaps harder than before, but with a different energy, a deeper sense of purpose. Horizon's success remained important, but no longer defined him completely. The foundation's work, the relationships he was building, the impact on individual lives like Leo's and Zoe's, these had become equally significant measures of achievement. That evening, Dominic made an unusual decision. Instead of working late at the office, he left at 5 o'clock, instructing his driver to take him to the community center where Zoe had mentioned her orchestra was performing. The modest auditorium was already filling with parents and friends when he arrived. He spotted Natasha and Leo in the front row and made his way toward them. "Dominic?" Natasha looked up in surprise. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Zoe mentioned her solo last week," he explained, taking the empty seat beside them. "I had a free evening." Leo grinned knowingly. "You mean you made a free evening? Natasha says your schedule is planned weeks in advance." "Some things are worth rearranging priorities for," Dominic replied simply. The school orchestra was exactly as one might expect. Earnest, occasionally off-key, endearingly committed. When Zoe stepped forward for her violin solo, Dominic found himself unexpectedly moved by her concentration, the same intense focus he recognized in Natasha. Afterward, Zoe rushed to them, violin case clutched in one hand, excitement making her words tumble over each other. "Did you hear that? I didn't mess up the middle section at all. And Mr. Dominic, I didn't know you were coming." "I wouldn't have missed it," he said, surprised to discover how true that statement had become. The 4 of them went for ice cream afterward, an ordinary family celebration that felt unexpectedly significant to Dominic. Watching Natasha tease her brother, seeing Zoe's pride in her performance, participating in the easy back and forth of their conversation, he found himself more engaged, more present than during any corporate dinner or executive retreat. Later, after dropping them at home, Dominic directed his driver to take the long route back to his penthouse. The city glowed around him, familiar yet somehow different when viewed through the lens of this evening's simple pleasures. His phone buzzed with a message from Rebecca. "Sophie keeps talking about her cool Uncle Dom who comes to all her recitals now. Whatever caused this change, I'm grateful." Dominic smiled, typing back, "Learning what actually matters. Better late than never." 1 year after their first meeting, Dominic and Natasha sat in a quiet corner of the Foundation's offices, reviewing progress on their initial projects. "The pilot program is showing promising results," Natasha reported, sliding a tablet across the desk. "Hospital readmission rates dropped 22% in communities using our navigation system." Dominic nodded, studying the data. "And the scholarship recipients?" "All 18 are on track academically. The family support services are making the difference." They worked through the remaining agenda items with familiar efficiency. As Natasha gathered her materials to leave, Dominic found himself reflecting on their unlikely journey. "Do you remember falling asleep in my lecture?" he asked suddenly. Natasha groaned, covering her face dramatically. "I still have nightmares about it. Worst first impression ever." "Actually," Dominic said thoughtfully, "it was perfect." She lowered her hands, looking puzzled. How could drooling in front of a billionaire be perfect? "Because if you'd been perfectly polished and attentive, I might have noticed your intellect, but missed your humanity." He smiled at her confusion. "I saw someone exhausted from carrying too many responsibilities, yet still showing up. It reminded me of something I'd forgotten." "What was that?" "That success without purpose is just busy emptiness." He gestured to the Foundation offices beyond the glass walls. "You helped me remember what matters." Natasha considered this, then shook her head. "I think you're giving me too much credit. These ideas were always inside you. You just needed permission to prioritize them." "Perhaps," Dominic conceded. "But sometimes we need someone else to see beyond the surface of who we've become, to who we could be." Outside his office windows, the city skyline gleamed in the evening light, the same view he'd stared at countless nights, feeling hollow despite his achievements. Now, watching Natasha gather her things, preparing to return to a small house where 2 siblings waited, Dominic understood what had changed. He'd built an empire of wealth, but had forgotten to build a life of meaning. A chance encounter a sleeping student in his lecture had awakened something dormant within him, the capacity to care about something beyond success itself. As summer turned to fall, the Foundation expanded its programs, adding educational initiatives based on the challenges Natasha had faced supporting her siblings through school. "The key insight," she explained during a presentation to potential donors, "is recognizing that academic achievement occurs within a family context. When we support the entire family unit, not just the student outcomes, improve dramatically." Dominic watched from the back of the room, noting the confidence with which she commanded attention, the clarity of her vision, the passion that made her arguments compelling. In just 18 months, she had grown from exhausted student to respected program director, her natural leadership abilities flourishing with opportunity and support. After the presentation, as donors mingled with staff, Dominic found himself approached by a venture capitalist he'd known for years. "Remarkable young woman," the man commented, nodding toward Natasha. "You found quite a talent there." "I did," Dominic agreed. "Though I sometimes think she found me." "Well, whatever the case, she's clearly the future of this organization." "And speaking of futures," the man lowered his voice conspiratorially, "rumor has it you're being considered for a cabinet position if Mercer wins the election." Dominic raised an eyebrow. "First I've heard of it." "Really? Your sustainability work has attracted serious attention in Washington. Energy Secretary Vaughn has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?" The suggestion would once have appealed to Dominic's ambition, another achievement to pursue, another measure of success. Now, he found himself unexpectedly resistant to the idea of leaving the work he'd only just begun to understand. That evening, Dominic invited Natasha to join him for dinner at a quiet restaurant near the Foundation offices. They'd fallen into the habit of occasional working dinners. opportunities to discuss strategy without the interruptions of daily operations. The donor response was excellent, he told her as they reviewed the day's presentation. Your educational initiative is likely to be fully funded by end of quarter. Natasha smiled, satisfaction evident. That's wonderful news. We can expand the pilot to 5 additional school districts, which means more families like yours getting the support they need. Dominic paused, considering his next words carefully. Natasha, where do you see yourself in 5 years? She looked surprised by the question. Professionally? Leading the education division, hopefully. Expanding our programs nationally. Why? I was offered a potential opportunity today. Government position, significant influence, chance to scale the work we're doing to a national level. Understanding dawned in her eyes. You're considering leaving the foundation. I'm considering all options, he clarified, and your perspective matters to me. Natasha was quiet for a moment, thinking, 2 years ago, I would have said, take it, maximize your influence, leverage your success. That's what they teach us in business school. And now? Now I understand that systems change happens at multiple levels simultaneously. National policy matters, absolutely. But so does direct intervention in individual lives. She met his gaze directly. The question isn't which approach has more value. It's which approach allows you to contribute your unique gifts most effectively. Dominic nodded, her insight resonating with his own evolving thoughts. And which approach do you think that is, in my case? I think you've already answered that question yourself, she said quietly. I've watched you these past 18 months. You're more engaged, more present, more alive when working directly with the people we serve than in any boardroom I've seen you in. The observation struck Dominic with the force of recognition she was right. For all his corporate success, he found deeper satisfaction in the Foundation's work, in mentoring Leo through college applications, in watching Zoe master difficult violin pieces, in seeing Sophie's face light up when he appeared at her recitals. 2 weeks later, Dominic called a joint meeting of Horizon's executive team and the Foundation's board of directors. Speculation ran high about the purpose of this unprecedented gathering, with rumors ranging from a merger to his retirement. Thank you all for coming, Dominic began, standing before the assembled leaders. For 15 years, I've had the privilege of building Horizon Technologies into an industry leader. The company's success has created tremendous value, financial, technological, and societal. He paused, looking around the room at the executives who had helped build his empire. 18 months ago, I launched the Vaughn Foundation with the belief that our success carries responsibility to address systemic failures that technology alone cannot solve. What began as a side project has evolved into something more significant, both for the communities we serve and for me personally. Murmurs rippled through the room as executives exchanged glances. Today, I'm announcing a restructuring of my role within both organizations. Effective immediately, I'm appointing Marcus Foster as CEO of Horizon Technologies. The announcement sent a shockwave through the room. Foster, Horizon's longtime COO, looked stunned despite previous discussions about succession planning. I will remain as chairman of the board, focusing on strategic direction while stepping away from day-to-day operations. This change will allow me to assume a more active role as executive director of the Vaughn Foundation, where I believe my skills and perspective can have the greatest impact at this time. Later, after fielding questions and congratulating Foster, Dominic found Victoria waiting outside the conference room. So you've made your decision, she observed, falling into step beside him. I have, he confirmed. It's time for a change. May I speak frankly, sir? Always. Victoria smiled slightly. It's the right decision. You've seemed more purposeful these past months than in all the years I've worked for you. With you, Dominic corrected. And I hope you'll continue. The Foundation needs your organizational skills even more than Horizon did. The transition occurred smoothly, with markets responding positively to Foster's appointment and Dominic's continued involvement as chairman. The Foundation, meanwhile, expanded its programs under Dominic's more engaged leadership, developing innovative approaches to entrenched social challenges. 6 months into his new role, Dominic found himself in a classroom again, not at Westmore this time, but at Roosevelt High School, where the Foundation had launched an entrepreneurship program for students from low-income communities. Natasha had developed the curriculum based on her own experience, combining practical skills with mentorship from successful business leaders. "Our guest today doesn't need introduction," she said, echoing Professor Montgomery's words from that first lecture. "But I'll give him one anyway." Dominic Vaughan built a multi-billion-dollar technology company before turning his attention to solving systemic problems in education, healthcare, and social services. More importantly, he understands that success isn't defined by wealth alone. As Dominic stood to address the students, teenagers whose circumstances resembled Natasha's more than his own, he felt a sense of rightness, of purpose, that had eluded him during years of corporate achievement. "Success," he began, "is often measured in dollars and titles. But the most valuable currency isn't financial, it's impact, not just what you build, but who benefits from your building." Looking around the classroom, at young faces filled with potential and challenges, Dominic understood how profoundly his definition of success had evolved since that fateful day when he noticed a sleeping student in his lecture. Later that evening, Dominic hosted a small gathering at his home, not the minimalist penthouse he'd once occupied, but a comfortable house in a neighborhood not unlike Natasha's. Purchased after his role change, Rebecca and Sophie were there, along with Natasha and her siblings, and a few close friends who had supported his transition. As conversations flowed around him, Leo discussing engineering programs with a foundation colleague, Zoe and Sophie comparing music lessons. Rebecca, deep in conversation with Natasha about the foundation's newest initiative, Dominic experienced a contentment that had once seemed as unattainable as success had once seemed essential. The doorbell rang, and he excused himself to answer it. A delivery person handed him a small package, Leo's acceptance letter to the engineering program at Dominic's alma mater, rush delivered as promised. Returning to the gathering, Dominic caught Natasha's questioning glance and nodded slightly. Her face broke into a wide smile as she squeezed Leo's shoulder. "Leo, I think there's something for you," she said, nodding toward Dominic. The young man's hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope, then broke into a grin that transformed his serious face. "I got in. Full scholarship." The room erupted in congratulations, everyone gathering around Leo as he read the acceptance letter aloud. Watching the joy on all their faces, Dominic felt a fierce pride, unrelated to his own achievements. Pride in Leo's hard work, in Natasha's unwavering support of her siblings, in the family they had created through love and determination. Later, as guests began departing, Natasha found Dominic in the kitchen, loading dishes into the dishwasher. "You had something to do with that scholarship, didn't you?" she asked, picking up a towel to dry the glasses he'd hand-washed. "Leo earned that acceptance completely on his own," Dominic replied truthfully. "His grades and test scores are exceptional. The scholarship fund happens to prioritize students who've overcome significant obstacles." "A fund you established," Natasha pointed out. "A fund we established," he corrected. "Your experience shaped its criteria." They worked in comfortable silence for a moment, before Natasha spoke again. "2 years ago, when I fell asleep in your lecture, if someone had told me where we'd be today, Leo going to Westmore, Zoe thriving in school, the foundation changing lives, I would have thought they were crazy. And if someone had told me I'd find more fulfillment in helping students like Leo than in quarterly earnings reports, I might have had them committed," Dominic added with a smile. "It's funny how life works, isn't it? How the worst moments sometimes lead to the best outcomes." Dominic considered this, thinking of the long path that had led him here, from driven entrepreneur to corporate titan to something more complex and satisfying than either role had allowed. "I've been thinking about what you said last year," he told her, "about me giving you too much credit for the changes in my life. And I think we're both right. The capacity for change was always there, but without the catalyst, without seeing you asleep in that lecture hall, without witnessing your determination and love for your siblings, I might have continued indefinitely on the same path." Natasha nodded thoughtfully. "Catalysts matter, but they only work when the elements are ready for transformation." Outside the kitchen window, stars punctuated the night sky, visible in this neighborhood in a way they never had been from his penthouse height. Dominic thought about transformation of companies, of systems, of hearts, and the unpredictable paths such changes followed. "Leo asked me something interesting yesterday," Natasha said, interrupting his thoughts. He wanted to know why someone like you would care about people like us. What did you tell him? That people aren't defined by categories like someone like you or people like us. That connections form across differences when we recognize our shared humanity. She paused, looking at him directly. Was I right? Dominic considered the question carefully. Partly. But there's something more specific. When I saw you that day, exhausted but determined, vulnerable but strong, I recognized something I'd lost in myself. The capacity to care deeply, to work for something beyond achievement itself. He smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his features. You reminded me that a heart exists to feel, not just to pump blood. Mine had been functioning mechanically for years before I saw you sleeping in that lecture hall. And now? Natasha asked quietly. Now, Dominic replied, looking around at the home he'd created, thinking of the community they'd built together. My heart has never been the same, and I wouldn't want it to be.